After the fall of Rhodes in 1522, Suleiman restored his empire's dominance in the Mediterranean, so now all his resources could be directed to the mainland. His target became the Kingdom of Hungary, weakened by internal chaos, which created good conditions for its capture. You're watching the Amazing History channel. Here we talk only about the most interesting events from the history of the ancient world and the Middle Ages. You can support the development of the channel as always through sponsorship on Patreon or PayPal. Also, don't forget to like and share your thoughts in the comments. And now let's get to the topic of this episode. The Ottomans had sought to conquer Central Europe since the time of Sultan Mehmed II. Suleiman I knew that the Kingdom of Hungary was the gateway to Europe, whose great powers were in a state of eternal rivalry. And this meant that the Hungarians would receive almost no help against the impending Ottoman invasion. The Kingdom of France and the Holy Roman Empire, ruled by Charles V, a Habsburg, were too busy fighting for control over Italy to pay attention to the Muslim empire at their doorstep, and Suleiman intended to use this to his advantage. In 1525, the Habsburgs defeated the French army at Pavia and captured the French king, Francis I. He was forced to make territorial concessions to the Habsburgs and renounce his claims to Italy. Of course, the French king was not satisfied with this outcome. He was looking for opportunities, simply put, to mess with the Habsburgs. Well, the best way to do this was to form an alliance with the Ottoman Empire, and he didn't care that they were Muslims. And Francis turned to Suleiman saying, "Let's be friends against the Habsburgs." This shocked all of Europe. The Ottoman Sultan was delighted by this prospect. This new alliance gave him extra motivation to finish what he started in 1521 when he captured Belgrade in 1521. Moreover, the alliance with France increased his legitimacy as a European emperor, and it gave him a reason to carry out the invasion he was already planning. For Suleiman to strike at Habsburg territory, as the French wanted, he first had to go through Hungary, and he began to assemble an army for the invasion. By that time, the Kingdom of Hungary was in a downward spiral. It was torn apart from within by feudal disputes among the magnates and peasant uprisings, resistance from national minorities who opposed Magyarization. And from outside, there were ambitious attempts by the Austrian Habsburgs to incorporate Hungary into their domains. In 1516, a young king ascended the Hungarian throne, Louis II. Over time, he realized what kind of threat his kingdom was facing. However, his pleas for unity went unheard, because the peasants, lords, and the royal house of Hungary were at odds with each other. The country was divided and vulnerable. In April 1526, a Turkish army of 100,000 with 300 cannons led by Suleiman and his favorite, the Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha, set out from Constantinople. Near Belgrade, it was joined by the Sanjak Beys of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Up the Danube, a fleet of 800 small rowing boats carrying janissaries moved forward. In mid-July, the Turkish army approached the fortress of Petrovaradin. Its garrison put up a heroic defense, but the Turks managed to dig a tunnel under the wall and blow it up. Through the breach that was formed, they broke into the fortress and killed almost all of its defenders. The next fortress, Ilok, Suleiman captured on August 8 without much resistance. The main battle for the lands of Hungary took place on August 29, 1526, near the city of Mohács, located in a flat area on the right bank of the Danube. The Hungarian army was far inferior to the Turkish army in both numbers and armament. King Lajos had only 25,000 soldiers and 80 cannons. Nevertheless, without waiting for the regiments from Transylvania to arrive, the king threw all his troops into the attack. Suleiman allowed the Hungarian cavalry to break through the first line of the Turkish troops. And when the Hungarians engaged in battle with the Janissaries, the Turkish batteries suddenly opened fire on them. They mowed down the Hungarians by the thousands and gave the Janissaries the opportunity to surround and completely defeat the Hungarian army. The battle ended with a great victory for Suleiman and a complete disaster for the Hungarians. When it became clear that the battle was lost, King Lajos tried to escape. In the chaos, his horse threw him into a swollen stream, and his heavy armor dragged him to a watery grave. Although sources differ, it is generally accepted that between 14,000 and 20,000 Hungarian soldiers were killed in this battle, and thousands were taken prisoner and beheaded the next day. The Ottomans lost only between 1,000 and 2,000 men. And to this day, the Battle of Mohács is considered a national tragedy for Hungarians. Suleiman could not believe that he had managed to destroy the entire Hungarian army so quickly. He expected more from a kingdom that had once been a formidable and strong opponent. For several days after the battle, he kept his troops in Mohács, waiting for new enemy forces to arrive. When none appeared, he marched on the kingdom's capital, the city of Buda, and took it almost without resistance. During this campaign, Ibrahim Pasha, Suleiman's close friend and Grand Vizier, rose to prominence. He gains great influence and essentially becomes the second most powerful man in the Ottoman Empire. After the battle, the exhausted Hungarian nobles were so divided and gripped by panic that they split into two camps, each choosing its own king. One of them was Ferdinand IV of Austria, the brother of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. The other was the Prince of Transylvania, János Zápolya. With the support of the Habsburgs, Ferdinand took advantage of the power vacuum and seized the Hungarian territories in Bohemia, taking the northwestern part of Hungary from János. The Prince of Transylvania had no choice but to befriend Suleiman, agreeing to become a vassal of the Ottomans, who became the suzerains of his kingdom. Zápolya sent desperate letters to Suleiman, asking him to intervene and drive the Austrians out of Hungary. The Sultan responded quickly and in the spring of 1529 launched his third campaign into Hungary. Thus, Hungary became the site of a clash between the Ottoman and Habsburg empires. Suleiman's enormous army, consisting of 120,000 men, included warriors from all Christian and Muslim ethnic groups of his empire. The Ottoman campaign to the north was not without difficulties. Spring rains poured down in torrents, numerous cannons got stuck in the mud, and camels, unaccustomed to the wet conditions, began to die en masse. Nevertheless, despite the difficulties, after joining forces with Zápolya's 6,000-strong detachment, the Ottomans swept through Hungary like a tsunami. They captured city after city, undoing Ferdinand's conquests. In August, Suleiman captured the capital, Buda, and restored János Zápolya to the throne. Then the Ottomans moved up the Danube, invaded Austrian territory, and on September 28 began the siege of Vienna. But this was not an easy task. Shortly before that, Emperor Charles V had sent a contingent of 17,000 mercenaries to defend Vienna. This unit consisted mainly of Landsknechts, elite professional soldiers mostly from Germany, known for their flamboyant clothing. They were led by Nicholas von Salm, a 70-year-old experienced soldier. He immediately began to reinforce the city walls and bricked up the gates. The suburbs outside the main citadel were demolished, depriving the Ottoman troops of any cover. Large earthen bastions were built along the walls to provide the defenders with a wide field of fire. The city's storehouses were stocked and the wells were filled with water. Vienna was ready for the siege. Suleiman unleashed fire on the city from 300 cannons. However, the fortress defenses of the Austrian capital were very strong, and all the attackers' assaults were repelled with heavy losses for them. The Turks once again resorted to tunneling and mining the walls, as they had previously done in Rhodes, but the defenders were prepared for this. By placing a bucket of water in the cellars along the city walls, they were able to determine where exactly the Ottomans were digging tunnels by observing the vibrations in the water. On October 8, the Landsknechts entered the trenches, killed many Turkish soldiers, and blew up the mines before they could reach the city walls. The German mercenaries also took heavy losses retreating into the city through narrow tunnels. Despite their efforts, one of the mines exploded too close to the city, creating a breach in the wall. The Ottomans saw this as an opportunity and launched an attack. For 3 days, the Janissaries tried to enter the city through the breach, but they were repelled. After that, problems began in Suleiman's camp. The morale of the Ottoman soldiers was falling. They were running out of food, and their commanders had to resort to executions to keep them from deserting. On the other hand, the Janissaries were expressing their dissatisfaction. They wanted to know if the siege would continue. Suleiman convened a council and decided to launch one final massive assault on the city walls. On October 14th, the full force of the besieging army was unleashed. The Ottoman army stormed the city walls. Nevertheless, they were unable to break through them. Austrian artillerymen attacked the advancing troops from the city walls, while the disciplined Landsknechts held the line with their steadfast pike formations and volleys of arquebus fire. After just a couple of hours, the Ottomans began to see the futility of their advance and called for a retreat. The next morning, a heavy snowfall covered the Ottoman camp. It was clear that the siege could not continue under such conditions. And on October 16, the Sultan gave the order to retreat from Vienna. The Christians, however, saw the October snowfall as divine intervention. The losses of the defenders remain unknown, but it is assumed that they were heavy. Nevertheless, Vienna was saved. But Ferdinand I did not have the strength to build on his success and was unable to liberate Buda. Although Suleiman failed to take Vienna, he presented the overall campaign as a success to his people. In the end, he nullified the Habsburgs' territorial gains in Hungary and restored his own dominance there. But it was clear that the confrontation would continue and the Sultan would not be satisfied with this. His fourth Hungarian campaign in 1532-1533 also did not yield any significant successes. The opponents, exhausted by the war, signed a peace treaty in July 1533, according to which western and northwestern Hungary passed to Austria. And Ferdinand undertook to pay an annual tribute to the Sultan and promised not to attack eastern Hungary, where power was in the hands of the Sultan's vassal János Zápolyi. This treaty practically meant the division of Hungary. The peace concluded with Austria left Suleiman free to wage war in the east, where the Safavid state was located. There was a long-standing rivalry between the Ottomans and the Safavids for control over important territories in the Middle East, particularly Anatolia, Iraq, and the South Caucasus. Their rivalry was also exacerbated by religious differences, since the Ottomans were Sunnis and the Safavids were Shiites. The Ottomans saw them as a threat to their religious and political hegemony in the Islamic world. In addition, the Safavids actively incited Shiite uprisings in the territory of the Ottoman Empire, especially in eastern Anatolia. Therefore, Suleiman decided to deal with his Iranian neighbors once and for all, and at the same time expand the borders of his empire to the east. In September 1533, taking advantage of the Safavids' war with the neighboring Shaybanids in Central Asia, Suleiman sent a large army to Iran under the command of the Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha. By bribing the commanders of the Iranian border fortresses, Ibrahim Pasha opened the way for himself to the Persian capital, Tabriz. In July 1534, he captured the city, and then all of southern Azerbaijan. By that time, Sultan Suleiman himself had joined the Turkish army to personally lead the campaign against Baghdad. Still encountering no resistance, the Ottomans took Baghdad without a fight in December 1534. The Sultan settled in this city for several months and, together with Ibrahim Pasha, organized the administration of Arab Iraq according to the Turkish model. The territory of the country was divided into administrative units called eyalets, as was customary in the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman system of land use and taxation was put into effect. However, the further advance of the Ottomans was stopped. In 1535, the Safavid Shah Tahmasp I was forced to lift the siege of Van and go to Azerbaijan. Both armies met near Hamadan, and the Safavid Kizilbash achieved an impressive victory. Suleiman retreated to Anatolia, and thus the first campaign against the Persians ended. Let me make a brief digression here, and I will tell you about the behind-the-scenes intrigues in Suleiman's camp, which would later become the subject of novels and films. By that time, Roxolana had strengthened her position in the harem, which caused wild jealousy in Mahidevran, Suleiman's senior concubine, and the mother of Prince Mustafa, the Sultan's heir. At one point, Mahidevran scratched Roxolana's face and tore her dress. The Sultan found out about this, got angry at Mahidevran, and sent her far away. And after that, something incredible happens. Roxolana becomes the Sultan's legal wife. Just so you understand, Ottoman sultans had never married before this. They had plenty of concubines, and that was basically enough for them. And the more children Hurrem bore the Sultan, the greater her influence at the Ottoman court became. The only person who stood in the way of Roxolana's rise was Ibrahim Pasha. Through behind-the-scenes intrigues, she began to turn Suleiman against his best friend. Rumors were spreading that Ibrahim Pasha was secretly negotiating with the Persians, making unauthorized decisions, stealing and things like that. But according to one version, what finally broke Suleiman's patience was the incident during the Persian campaign, when Ibrahim Pasha executed Iskandar Çelebi, another trusted man of the Sultan. A death sentence was passed on Ibrahim, and one morning he was found strangled in his chambers. Thus, Roxolana became the only one who could influence the Sultan. At this point, I will pause my story about Sultan Suleiman. Don't miss the next episode, subscribe. In it, you will learn about his confrontation with the Habsburgs at sea. See you